The Democratic Alliance has released the names of candidates that are set to battle it out for leadership positions at its federal Congress.
Yeah, it heads to Congress amid several challenges at some municipalities where it is part of coalitions. The new leadership will have to map a way forward for the party ahead of the 2024 elections.
Exactly. Let's get more on this for you now. Bring in former DA leader Tony Leon, who joins us via our video link this morning. Tony, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thanks as always for making time. And of course, I don't need to tell you this, that these contests can be quite bruising, not only for the individuals involved, but also for the organization as a whole. And let's face it, the DA has had, let's call it a turbulent past couple of years. With that context in mind, how do you reckon they should go about this contest next month?
Well, I think the contest is now in the open, and that's probably a good thing for a democratic organization. And I have to say, I don't think it's that much of a contest, because I think two of the three positions, although they're going to be nominal elections, you're absolutely assured of the incumbents going to be re-elected, because the federal chairman, Ivan Meyer, and the chairperson of the federal executive, Helen Zille, really don't have the person standing against them. The same person as an unknown branch member, I think, from Sunnyside, whom I think until yesterday 90% of the DA and certainly probably 100% of South Africans didn't know of her existence. So I'm not sure that's a real contest. I think there is more of a fight for the federal leadership, or the position of the leader of the party, because there you do have two very well-known people standing against each other. The one is the incumbent John Steenhuisen, and the other is the former mayor of Johannesburg, Dr. Paul Palazzi. There, I also think the incumbent Steenhuisen will be re-elected by a significant majority, simply because he has a lot of popularity inside the party. I think that is going to determine the result, because after all, this is an internal election. Whatever folks say on Twitter, whatever the commentary class says, the DA members and delegates will choose their own leaders. And just on every indication, and I'm not trading inside information here, it seems that John Steenhuisen has overwhelming internal support in the party. So I actually think you're going to come out of that Congress with the present leadership intact and re-elected. Well, that's the internal part of it. But as you alluded to in your introductory remarks, it's how you face the country and all the problems in the country in the run-up to the election that is going to determine the success or the failure of the re-elected DA leadership after April.
Without a doubt. I mean, the comments in the commentariat, yes, don't necessarily have a bearing on the actual voting. Some might argue perhaps they do at the level of perceptions. But, it matters how people view the organization, even as they go through this democratic process, we're told, inside the DA. In fact, already, Mpopalatshe started doing a couple of interviews a few weeks ago, and her remarks, are landing in very interesting ways, at least for people who are watching from the outside, especially the comments she made about, John Steenhuisen potentially not having the capacity she has to take the DA to the next level.
Well, of course, you've got to advance your candidacy in the best way possible. I'm not sure bombing your own ship is necessarily an election-winning strategy for a party election, but that will be determined by the party delegates. Of course, she also has to account for the fact that she was removed as mayor of Johannesburg, and that isn't necessarily a calling card that's going to suggest to party members that she is the person to advance the party across the country. But look, that's going to be determined in the next few weeks, and let's see what the delegates make of that. I actually think the far more significant matter is how the DA is going to refresh the opposition cause generally, and specifically in dealing with other opposition parties, to present a united front so that voters have an option against what could be a nightmare scenario, in my view, for the country, of the ANC and the EFF forming the next government in the country. To me, offering an alternative to that, a viable alternative, is the single most important necessary task of the lead opposition party in South Africa, which is the DA, because they are the second largest party.
Yeah, and we have something to point to at the moment, right, to gauge how the DA may act at a national level because of what we've seen take place at various municipalities. In fact, you mentioned how Dr. Mpopalate was ousted as mayor. She's insinuated, not said so explicitly, that part of that reason was because there was interference at a national level when negotiations had to take place in those councils. Nonetheless, again, there are already lessons to be learned, many might say, around how the DA, even as recently as this week, has handled some of those discussions after losing the speaker position in Tshwane.
Yes, look, it's not exactly a good advertisement for coalition building when the coalition governments that were headed by the opposition, in this case the DA, in Tshwane, in Johannesburg, and, well, Kureni is still standing, have all failed in one sense or another. And, you know, as President Kennedy once said, victory has 100 fathers, defeat is an orphan. So there's a lot of, no doubt, blame placing going around. But I don't think it enthralls opposition voters or potential supporters that the opposition couldn't actually sustain its governance in those cities and those metros. I think one of the big problems was the actual outcome of the 2021 municipal elections, because actually in a place like Joburg, the DA only got 26% of the vote. So whoever was in charge, even if the Archangel Gabriel had descended from the heavens and been enthroned as mayor of Joburg, with 26%, it is very difficult to sustain a coalition if that's your biggest block. So I guess what the party is going to try to do is to say, look, give us a very much bigger mandate nationally, and we will be able to create a more stable opposition coalition going forward. But I think the difficulty is to somehow get the other opposition parties who don't support the ANC and the EFF to not cannibalize each other's votes, so that you can go forward to the voters and say, look, there is a clear choice in South Africa between ANC and EFF on the one hand and this group of opposition parties on the other, who do not have to love each other, they don't have to even join together, but they have to demonstrate a common cause in the wider interests of South Africa. That's my view anyway.
And it's a balancing act, isn't it? On the one hand, you want to be able to make those compromises, because that's what it's going to take, really, in order to reach out to people who are on the other side of the ideological spectrum. On the other hand, you need to make sure that you're retaining some of your supporters who are actually supporting you because of the very stance you take ideologically. You know, for instance, part of the question or the discussion is around whether we've got a mature enough body of leaders who are able to navigate that complexity without, you know, causing a whole lot more damage than good.
I absolutely agree with you. You know, I think you've nailed it there, because it might be, and I don't know, the DA in the last general election got around 20% of the vote. At its very height in the local elections in 2015, I think it got 26%. So the DA total is somewhere between 20 and 26%. So let's assume that the DA can, on its best day, in the best possible conditions, get 25% of the votes across South Africa. That is possible. I'm not saying it's inevitable. The question is, what about the other votes who've indicated that they don't want the ANC in government? They're very wary of the terror tactics of the EFF and the hooliganism we've seen in Parliament. We'd like to see on the streets again of South Africa next Monday with the so-called national shutdown. What about them? Who's going to make an offer to them to galvanize them, excite them, and get them to vote, and to make sure when they cast a vote that it actually lands up not simply in a very undesirable place? For example, you know, I suspect but don't know that quite a few Patriotic Alliance voters who went to vote for Mr. Mackenzie's party in the last municipal election didn't reckon that they were going to land up putting the ANC into government in Joburg or in Tshwane, potentially. And I suspect exactly the same thing lies behind COPE voters, the very few who left. They didn't actually go and vote for COPE in order to install an ANC or EFF administration in Joburg or Tshwane. So, you know, the question is, can there be a mature understanding between opposition parties who can actually then get their act together, make a bold offer to South Africans and say, it doesn't matter if you vote for the DA or you vote for the Freedom Front, or you go and vote for the ACDP, or you go and vote for Action SA, these parties have got a common cause of cooperation, and we can give you a guarantee that we'll stand together after the election to create an alternative in South Africa. Now, it's easier to describe the broad architecture of that than the nitty-gritty detail, but I suspect, and I can only say this because I am no longer there, if I were the leader of the DA, and if I was going to be re-elected in April, I would make that my central primary message, to try and get the party into its best condition so it can maximize its votes, but at the same time, it's not going to cannibalize other opposition votes in order to try and form the pole of a new opposition alignment in South Africa. And that, of course, is something that the party's tried before. It's put itself forward in KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, there is now a formalized cooperation agreement between the IFP, very important player in KwaZulu-Natal, and the DA. That could be a template which could be widened so that the party can make an attractive offer to voters who want an alternative to the nightmare that a lot of South Africans are living under at the moment and don't just want to sleepwalk into some even worse outcome after the next election.
Can't help but wonder how many of these candidates, including the incumbent, are watching our discussion. Tony Leon, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.